Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana 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 Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Oh Jashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Jashoda Jashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana 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 Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bolo. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. श्री श्री राधा मदन मोहन की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदी हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. So thank you all for being here for the third part of the seminar, the second day. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the devotees here for their attention. I want to thank particularly His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu for providing this opportunity and for creating a community of devotees who are both very learned and very active in their devotional service. This is a very rare combination to find, that knowledge and learning and intensive study is put in action in our practice, in our lives. And I think in the model of his own life, he has created this wonderful community that embodies that quality. And it's very inspiring for me to be present here for another day and another time. I was reflecting on how somehow this happens each year. It's been happening for, 3 or 4 years, that I end up visiting on Srila Jiva Goswami's appearance day and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's appearance day. And this was when the first seminar was scheduled way back when, on Srila Jiva Goswami's philosophy, and this particular weekend was. In fact, even before that, it was the very first seminar was on the phone. It was a very short class that Vaisheshika Prabhu had requested, and that too was on Srila Jiva Goswami's appearance day. So somehow Krishna has drawn me back. And I want to thank my hosts also, Shivas Pandit Prabhu and Mother Malini, for providing me with hospitality here, and for all the devotees and all the work they've done. The cooks who've made wonderful prasad, and the devotees who run the studio system, and everyone else who I don't know exactly who's doing what tasks, the pujaris for dressing the deities beautifully and performing their arti. So thank you all so much. This provides me so much inspiration in whatever devotional service I'm able to do. Yesterday we focused on Krishna's quality of forgiveness, and then we talked about how to be forgiven ourselves, all the while trying to give examples and models drawn from Srimad Bhagavatam. Today, in this final part, I want to talk about the question of how to forgive. So, how to be forgiven was yesterday, how to forgive today. So what if we're on the other end of the story, where someone has wronged us and we feel wronged ourselves? How can we come, and why should we forgive? So, first, the question of why should we forgive? There's many kind of spiritual reasons we could give. The most important being one that we've already discussed yesterday, which is that Krishna embodies this quality of forgiveness, and he asks that quality to be present in each of us as a samanya dharma, as a general duty for all human beings. But just on a very kind of down-to-earth level, forgiving someone is actually of great relief and benefit for us. When we keep our anger and our a resentment and grudge and a feeling of hurt present, and we nourish it inside of us by keeping it alive, it's actually more work and more pain than we realize. Well, let me ask you to try this. Take your fist and clench it up as tight as you possibly can. Okay, really tight. Now, clench it up even tighter. Right? It gets painful after a while, no? Now let go. And there's an immediate sense of relief, right? The hand, you feel the energy and the blood flow again, and the body relaxes. The whole body becomes tensed up when just a fist is tight. Similarly, when we hold something, some pain or some anger towards someone within our own hearts, it may be one small part of our life. But often we get around it, or we justify it by saying, everything else is going well in my life. It's just that person I don't like, or just that incident which was painful. And yet that knot, that clenching in our subtle body can cause the whole thing to become very painful. And we don't recognize how much that is built up in our system until we finally let go. And one example I can give from Srimad Bhagavatam for this, which is a really wonderful one, is the story of King Pururava and his wife, the Apsara Urvashi. The story of Pururava and Urvashi is a romance. It's a love story. And it's the oldest written love story in the world. It's found all the way back in the Rig Veda, which even for historians is pretty much the oldest sacred text that we have. So in terms of sacred love stories, or love stories found in sacred works, the story of Pururava and Urvashi is the oldest. And it's expanded and developed very beautifully in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Rig Veda has just the very bare bones, the basics of the story. But it's expanded in Bhagavatam. And it starts off as a very typical kind of fairy tale type of story, where the king is walking in a garden one day and he happens to see this beautiful nymph, Apsara, named Urvashi, and he talks to her, and she talks to him, and they get talking, and they introduce each other, and how are you, and whose daughter are you, and are you married, are you not married, and what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? Strawberry? Mine too. Wow, look at that. And I think we're made for each other, right? And one thing after another, and they get married. But before marriage, Urvashi is a little odd. She says, yes, I'm willing to marry you, but I have a couple of conditions. Okay. First is that I will only eat ghee. Okay, the king says, fine. If you can keep a figure like that, just eating ghee, no problem. I'll feed you ghee. The second thing she says is that I should never see you naked, except at the time of intercourse, but otherwise never. Okay, fine. The third request is that I have 2 goats, or lambs, and they are like my children, and they need to be protected at all costs. If any of these conditions are broken, then I will be gone. Well, after some time of enjoying with her, Indra in heaven starts to miss Urvashi's presence in his court. And so he sends down a couple of Gandharvas to bring her back. And they know about the conditions. So in the middle of the night, they creep into their chamber and they steal the 2 goats that are tied to their bedpost. And the goats, of course, start to bleat, as they do. And when Urvashi hears this, she becomes really anxious and really upset and starts saying, oh, what kind of man are you? You can't even protect these 2 children of mine. You're good for nothing. I should have known this in advance. I should have married someone else. And this starts to pierce Pururava's ego. She questions his manliness, his virility, his sense of pride. And so he jumps out of bed, but of course he's naked. And as soon as he goes out, he fights the Gandharvas, gets the goats, but just before they leave, they shine their brilliance. They turn on the lights, so to speak. And for just a moment, Urvashi sees Pururava in that unclothed condition. And instantly, she is gone. She disappears. Now, Pururava is left brokenhearted, and he's searching and searching. He travels, he wanders the world looking for Urvashi. In fact, more than brokenhearted, he is feeling betrayed. And in the song that he sings of lament, you can hear all the emotions that one would hear in a case where one person gets dumped by another. Anger, betrayal, frustration, love, it's all mixed up in this jumble that is very confusing to the person themselves, right? You don't know what feeling you're experiencing in that condition. And Pururava is completely confused, and he's like a madman wandering, stumbling through this world. And somehow he comes across Urvashi, and she's with a few of her girlfriends in this garden. And he goes to her and begs her to return. And Urvashi says, I'm so sorry. You broke the condition. I have nothing to do with you. I'm an Apsara. I belong in heaven. Did you seriously think I was going to stay with you forever? And, and by the way, we have a son together. And when the son is born, I will deliver the son to you. He's yours. But let me raise him first. So she leaves him, and he's even more distressed. And seeing his distressed condition, he threatens suicide. She gives him a solution that you pray to the Gandharvas, and they will help you find a way to get me back. Well, the story goes on. He prays to the Gandharvas. In fact, he does get her back, just for one night every year. That's the deal, one night every year. And then eventually, he gets to go to the planets of the Gandharvas, the Apsaras himself, and he gets to be with Urvashi. But when he gets there, he undergoes a change of heart. And he sings this beautiful song found in the 11th canto. So the story I just told you is found in the 9th canto. And you would think that the story kind of ended as a happily ever after story. The two of them got together and they lived happily ever after. But there are no happily ever after endings in the material world. It doesn't exist. And so I don't know if you've noted this before. This is something that used to strike me a lot as when I was a teenager, is how all the fairy tales in the world, they end when the two people get married, and then it stops. They both got married and they rode off into the sunset. That's the happily ever. What happens after marriage, no one actually talks about. Because that's when life actually begins, right? That's when the real work of this life begins. Up to that point, it is all Bollywood, him and her, and they all get together, and they dance, and then they get married, and the movie ends at that point. For good reason, because who wants to know the rest after that? So at that point, you think, well, okay, everything's beautiful. But when Pururava gets to her world, he feels, he looks back at his life, and he starts to see the ridiculousness of it all. And despite the fact that he's with her, he's still smarting from the pain and the anger and the regret, the grudge that he's built up towards Urvashi. That she humiliated him, she left him, she did not care what he felt, and even when they had a son together, she just abandoned him. And he's still angry and smarting about that. And at that point, he has a change of heart where we don't know exactly why. The Bhagavatam doesn't tell us. In general, this change of heart usually happens because of the association of a devotee. But basically, he has a change of heart, and he looks back at his life and he says, why am I blaming her for what I've been through? she gave me certain conditions, and she left as promised in those conditions, when those conditions were broken. In fact, even before we got married, she warned me twice. She said, don't go with this. Don't go through with this. This is not going to ultimately make you happy. In this way, she was my teacher. She was my guru. She said she taught me Vedic hymns, Vedic mantras. And yet I'm angry and upset at her. And as a result of that, look at what I have done. I ran after those two goats naked like a madman. Then I wandered the world like a madman. And I've become completely crazy because of nothing but my own doing, and yet I want to blame her. Let me stop this. Let me give it up. And he gives up his anger. He gives up his frustration and his irritation. And he renounces this world. He renounces heaven itself and becomes a sannyasi, becomes a monk, and wanders this world, realizing that Urvashi doesn't belong to anyone. She's an apsara. And his happiness is not going to be found in trying to cling to her company. When he gives up that attachment, he feels the greatest sense of relief a person could, and happiness. And the Bhagavatam says he wanders this world completely peaceful and completely content at heart. In other words, the point is this, that when we hold something against someone, like Pururava held against Urvashi, that anger does nothing but harm ourselves. That feeling, that grudge, it's not hurting that person. It might be hurting that person, but any misery that we can give to another person through our words or actions, we experience twice as much ourselves. In that whole scenario, Pururava had so many harsh things to say to Urvashi, but the person who was suffering as a result of those harsh words was him. So there's just a very practical benefit in forgiveness, something that is going to help us be happier as individuals and be more relieved and be more peaceful and content. We forgive not just for the benefit of the other person. Sometimes people, when we think of forgiveness, we think, well, that person has to earn our forgiveness, right? What did they do to earn forgiveness? But why not think of it the other way? Let's forgive for ourselves first. Whether that person earns it or not, it doesn't matter. If we forgive, we're better off. Now, the main obstacle to that forgiveness is usually anger, because we feel wronged in some way. And so we've developed this anger and we've nourished it. And it grows over time. So the first thing we should talk about is this obstacle of anger and why it's such a problem. Number one, anger is almost always misdirected. Anger has many issues. I'll name just a few. The first is it's almost always misdirected. You're angry about one thing, but it comes out on something else. In fact, what I'm angry is that you insulted me in the meeting. But instead, what do I say? Gosh, the food you cooked was terrible, right? It comes out in some totally different direction. We start disliking that person for things that they're actually really good at. They're good cooks. They're really good at helping us in our times of need. They're really good at serving at the temple. They're really good in all kinds of things. They're knowledgeable. But because of that one thing that I'm harboring anger about, that anger will spill out. It'll burst out in all different directions. Not only do we direct that anger to the person for reasons that they are not at fault, But often that anger will be misdirected at totally the wrong person altogether. How many times have we come home from work after a difficult day at work, maybe our boss has mistreated us or someone else, and we take that out on our spouse or our children? That anger that's pent up inside, it goes elsewhere, right? So the first problem with anger is that it's misdirected. The second challenge is that it's almost always out of proportion. The situation may genuinely deserve anger. It may be something someone has wronged us, but it deserves this much anger, and we give it this much anger. Right? We react in a significant way. Yesterday we gave an example of this with Maharaj Dhruva, right? That the anger was legitimate in the sense that his younger brother Uttam was killed by that yaksha, and yet it was both misdirected and unproportionate. It was directed against every yaksha on the surface of the earth, and it was disproportionate because he was killing all of them instead of just punishing the one who had actually done the misdeed. Same thing with the prachetas. They felt anger, but it became disproportionate, and they started killing all the trees that were present. So it's misdirected, it's disproportionate, and then thirdly, it's self-centered. Now, we all know pride is self-centered. That's intuitive. But anger is just the same. There's a subtle pleasure in being angry, which is why we cultivate or we harbor it. The reason there's pleasure in it is because for the time we are angry, we can legitimately make ourselves the center of our world. It's all about me. I'm angry, I was wronged, look at me, and we become the center. And that is a pleasurable situation for a conditioned soul, to be at the center of the situation, at the center of the world. Think about this. I mean, when we have, say we have something unwanted, like a disease, then we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, right? We don't harbor the disease, cultivate it, develop it, nourish it. We don't. We want to just get rid of it out of our system because it's truly miserable. But with anger, notice how we're not ready to give it up right away. We cultivate it. We can nourish it. We can spend time stewing over something. And the only time as conditioned souls we do something like that, we keep something and nourish it, is when we get some pleasure out of it. It's a very mode of passion, mode of ignorance sort of pleasure, but it's pleasure nevertheless. And it's the same reason we get pleasure in anything else in the material world, because we're in the middle, we're at the center of the attention. This is the same reason being pitied gives us pleasure, or feeling angry gives us pleasure, or feeling pride gives us pleasure, or lust, or any of those negative qualities give us joy. The only reason we keep them in our hearts, even though they're anarthas, is because in some twisted way, in some perverted way, they're giving us some happiness. It's not a great form of happiness, and that kind of happiness, like most happiness in the material world, will end up giving us more suffering, like we tried to demonstrate. In the end, it's painful. It hurts no one but ourselves, that anger. But for the time that it's enjoyable, we keep it and we stew over it. And then finally, it has no productive effect. It has no productive effect. And Suniti makes this point to Dhruva when he's really angry. His lips are trembling and he's crying, because his father has told him that you cannot sit on my lap. This throne doesn't belong to you. My love doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your your half-brother, Uttam. And he's so angry and so upset about that. And he goes trembling in anger to his mother. And his mother gives him the same message. She's his first guru. And she says, my boy, whatever anger you're feeling, it's not going to do anything good for you. It's not going to be any benefit. It's not productive. Rather, channel that anger into a determination to serve the Lord, to serve Vishnu. And that's what will actually make you happy. So for all of these reasons, anger is not a worthy emotion to cultivate. Now, it does have its place. And we hear that anger can be useful when it is properly directed and proportionate to the offense committed and not stewed and harbored, not selfish in nature. It's used for a purpose and then dropped. But who among us can really use anger like that? It's very difficult. Occasionally, maybe, in certain cases where we're very intentional about it, it can happen. And Srila Prabhupada used anger in that way. So many of his disciples who knew him personally talk about how he would become upset at a disciple, and it would be like the world was ending. It was so intense, and the person they had given their lives to please, he was not happy with them. It was a big deal. And yet, the moment the point was made, they would return to his room and Prabhupada would be sunny again. Right? It would the trace of that anger the anger would leave no trace on his consciousness. It was a tool he used and it was gone. Even in the case of Lord Shiva, we talked about him yesterday, but even in his case, right? His anger, despite the fact that we can look at him. Yesterday we were marveling at how he cut off Daksha's head for the insult, right? And you can say, well, that's over the top or disproportionate. But as a world lord, as the lord of the world, Lord Shiva he's quick to be angered, but he has that anger in his control. And we see that he cut off his head as a way to teach him a lesson. But it was proportionate for Lord Shiva. It was okay because he was also able to put the head back and give him life again, right? Whereas when we usually express our anger, then we don't have a remedy for it. We say something that we cannot retract. We do something that we regret for a long time to come. Whereas Lord Shiva, even if in his anger he cuts off the head, well, we'll get you a new head and things will be okay. So, for that reason, anger as an obstacle is one that we have to be very careful and very conscious about. And when that anger arises, to separate ourselves from that experience, as we were discussing yesterday, to stand back from it and watch the anger arise and not react to it immediately. Once again, like so many things in this seminar, we can say yet again that time is our friend, right? The Lord incarnates as the time factor, and while he is scary and dangerous for the whole world, he is very kind and very friendly towards the devotee. And for the devotee, the time is a great partner in our Krishna consciousness in every way. And in this way, again, when anger arises, if we just hold back in reacting and give it some time. We don't have to solve it. We don't have to figure out what to do. If we just wait before opening our mouth, before raising our hand, before acting in any way, we just wait, then usually a better solution presents itself in time. Now, we might hear this and then someone might say, well, but okay, this is fine, but if someone has wronged me, do they not deserve a reaction? Do they not deserve to receive something back as a result of what they have done? And the answer is yes. It may be the case, it probably is the case, that some reaction is due for the pain that they have caused you. As a result of their action, that person has probably accrued bad karma, and that karma will return to them. But if we give it to them, if we are the instrument that gives them that reaction, then what happens? Well, they get that reaction and they are freed of that karma. Now who is left holding that karma? It's me, right? I've served as the instrument and I'm implicated in that karmic cycle, in that karmic change. Gahana karmano gati. It becomes now my responsibility, to some extent at least. The logic of he started it doesn't work for the law of karma. This is a favorite amongst children. Well, he started it. No, you started it. No, I. And you do that back and forth as if the person who started it is the one who's responsible for everything. That person may have a slightly higher responsibility, but the law of karma doesn't operate on the principle of who started it. The law of karma asks who's involved. Who's involved? In an accident, when you get in a car wreck, almost never is it 100% only one party's fault. When the insurance divides it up, then they usually give percentages. They say, it was 70% their fault, yeah, but 30% yours. You didn't give the indicator light, did you? So, okay, it's a little bit your fault as well. Almost never. Or if in the case of meat eating, for example, right, the scriptures say that it's not just the person who eats the meat, but also the person who prepares it, and the person who serves it, and the person who kills the animal, and the person who cleans up, and all kinds of other people involved. So the law of karma says who's involved. And if we have the conviction that the law of karma is infallible, that it's amogha, that it will reach its desired goal, then why take up that responsibility ourselves? Why implicate ourselves voluntarily in that chain? That person has done whatever they have to us, they'll get it. Right? They will receive whatever they have to. And when I decide to be the wielder of the law of karma instead of Krishna, maya dhakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam, Krishna says, this material world is running on my control, the law of karma, then all of a sudden we receive that bad karma ourselves. Now, suppose we can add the question further, a further objection, and say, well, what if we're in a position where we should correct a person? What if we are the ones who are responsible in some way? And isn't it, we see some injustice, isn't it our duty to speak up? When someone wrongs us, and some injustice has been committed, the most karma-free way to go about resolving it is to take that matter to someone who is that person's superior or senior, who has responsibility for that person, and address them and say, we have this problem. This person has done this. Can you help? When we take a problem or a challenge that someone has to that person's senior, then we don't commit offense because we take it to the person who's responsible. We take it in the right direction. Instead of, for example, gossiping about that with our friends, or instead of trying to deal with it ourselves and give that person the reaction, or instead of doing any number of things that we try. When we go to that person's superior, there's an appropriateness there. Right? There's a relationship there in which it can be resolved. So, taking it to the superior in confidence is almost never a harmful thing. At worst, what will happen is that person will tell us, okay, I'll look into this, but you too, please calm down. Or maybe you're overreacting. We might get some good instruction too. But there's very little chance for offense if we keep those two things in mind. Go to one who is that person's superior. Or if you need advice, to your senior. And secondly, we keep it confidential. Now, what if we are that superior? What if we are in that position of responsibility? I am the parent, or I'm the teacher, or I am the whatever, and I have that responsibility to look after them. Then yes, in that case, we can properly give some rebuke or punishment or whatever is due. We can do that, and we should do that. It's in our role of responsibility. Then forgiveness is not in the okay, then at that point it's not our duty to forgive. It's our duty to do something about it. But even there, as we play that role, we are still implicated in that person's karma. There's still no escape. And this is why, again and again in Srimad Bhagavatam, we find that persons in positions of that responsibility, whether it be kings or whether it be parents, at a certain point in their life, they walk away. At a certain point in their life, they give up that responsibility and they say, I've done what I could to help you, my son or my daughter. I've done what I could to lead you, my people. And now I'm going to the forest, like Bharat Maharaj, like the Pandavas, like King Pururava, like every single king we hear about, righteous king, like Lord Ramachandra, and saying, okay, now no more implicating myself in all of this. At some point, it's time for me to live a life of bhajan, a karma-free life that is not tied up with the karmic cycle of everyone else that I'm trying to lead and guide and so on. Because in those roles, it is inevitable that sometimes we will punish just a little more than we should, or just a little less than we should, and in the process implicate ourselves. The finest example of this is the Mahabharata, right? After what Draupadi experienced, the justice that she asked for, the killing of Dushasana and Duryodhana, was completely right. There was nothing wrong with it. It was true. That was deserved. Every one of them deserved the punishment, the suffering that they received. This is the 6 aggressors are described in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1. And yet, even though she got what she wanted, and even though they got what they deserved, but in the end, no one turned out to be the winner, right? There was suffering all around. Because the karmic cycle is such that no one really comes out victorious at the end of it. Even Draupadi is left at the end of the battle, in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, she's left wondering, was this really worth it? Yudhishthira is left wondering, was this really worth it? All of these people and all of this pain that we had to go through and them? So, yes, sometimes we cannot forgive. Sometimes we must not forgive because it is our role to correct. But let us keep in mind that that is a very sharp-edged tool. It's razor sharp. And one little flick of the razor in the wrong direction, we can end up cutting ourselves or others. And so it has to be employed very, very carefully. And then at some point, we desist. At some point in our lives, we say, okay, I think this is plenty. Right? This is plenty. And so this is the story. This is the wonderful trajectory that the Vedas give for any person in this world, any relationship in this world, that there's a time for attachment and there's a time for detachment. As parents, it is our job to sometimes correct and to not forgive our children. But there's a time to do that. And if we don't stop doing that at a certain point, then we get ourselves into trouble. The children grow up, and then we have to back off and say, okay, now you wield your own razor, right? You learn to shave yourself. I can't do that anymore, right? Because that's not my role. At some point, we become detached. Whether it's a teacher or a king or a parent, there's a time for attachment and there's a time for detachment. Now, the big question then is, how can we get ourselves to forgive? Okay. So this first part so far, okay, why we should forgive. Because it's better for us, it's better for them, because we don't implicate ourselves in further in the law of karma, because anger is such a dangerous tool and such a blunt instrument as well. Fine, but how do we actually do this? How do we get ourselves to forgive? There's 2 key things that need to happen. The first is that we reconsider, we change our perspective, we reconsider our view of the person who has wronged us. What does that mean? How do we do it? Firstly, by instead of saying, they have chosen to harm us, that person decided to hurt me, we instead say, that person is forced to act according to their own nature. This is one of the most important instructions of Bhagavad Gita. It's one of the most important changes of perspective that Krishna gives in the Gita, is to help Arjuna to recognize, to realize that everyone in this world is forced to act according to their nature. And therefore, that person who is harming us is probably not doing it because of us at all. They're doing it because they're driven to respond to a situation based on their own nature. I'll give you one example. When Lord Brahma wrongs Krishna by stealing the cows and the calves, and he hides them for a year, and then finally realizes that he's playing with the wrong person, and he returns those cows and the cowherd boys to Krishna. He comes to beg forgiveness from him. Srila Prabhupada writes in the Krishna book, he says something really amazing. He says that Lord Brahma's misdeed or misbehavior was to be expected because of his nature in the mode of passion. Brahma's nature as a creator is in the mode of passion. That's how he does his service to the Lord. As a result of that, he ends up doing occasionally something that is not exactly very reasonable. But that kind of behavior is to be expected. Even someone like Lord Brahma is driven by his own nature. What to speak of people like you and me? When King Rahugana is meeting Jad Bharat, so Jad Bharat is a great sage. He used to be King Bharat in his last life. And Rahugana is walking, his palanquin is being carried by many servants. And he needs another one to help him carry the palanquin. And he sees this young, strong man named Bharata, Jad Bharata. And he doesn't know who he is, but servants call him into his service. And he's carrying this palanquin, but he's not doing it very well because Jad Bharata is trying to avoid the ants and the bugs on the ground. He doesn't want to kill them, so he's kind of jumping and hopping, and this is causing a shaking in the chariot, in the palanquin. And Rahugana comes out and he starts being verbally abusive towards Jad Bharata. He says, "You imbecile, you fool, what are you? You're not strong. What's wrong with your body? You can't do this simple task. Looks like you've grown old," even though he's a young man. "Looks like you're a madman." He starts saying all kinds of nasty things to him. And when he realizes who this person is, he feels so much remorse. And what does he say? He says, "I ended up acting like this because it was my nature. As a king, I have a tendency to become angry." Bhagavatam explains that that reaction, which was over the top, was because he had a certain fiery nature that serves him well as a king, and yet can sometimes get him into trouble. When Dhruva Maharaj is angry at the Yakshas, it's to be expected that a king will feel a sense of revenge and will fight. And this is why a king always has advisors, Brahmins around him, to help stop him at the right time. It's almost as if Dhruva Maharaj expected that if I get out of hand, someone will come and stop me. Right? Someone will help me contain myself. He had that much trust because it's in the nature of a king to sometimes let that quality of anger or passion get out of hand. This is why he's able to do the service he does. And yet, that good quality also turns into the greatest enemy at times. So this is true about everyone in this world. We all have really good qualities, and those very good qualities become our downfall in other circumstances. For a Brahman, their peacefulness and their reasoning ability is their great strength. But in certain situations, you don't need a whole lot of reasoning. You need action. And yet, I have seen with academics and scholars myself, we can go on weighing the options left and right and left and right, and the whole moment for action has gone. Right? It's disappeared because we're still debating. On the other hand, the Kshatriya needs the ability to act and get the deed done. Fight first, think later. Right? That's the Kshatriyas. I mean, if your kingdom is under attack, what are you going to do? Think about it? You have to get out, right? And you have to push the button. You have to send the troops in right away. But that too can become his greatest downfall, because if he acts when it's not appropriate, this is going to cause harm. Everyone's best qualities are also the cause of their downfall in another circumstance. The only person who can have just the right quality for the right circumstance at all times is Krishna himself. Right? He can do it all. He can be the Kshatriya and the Vaishya and the Shudra and the Brahman all at the same time in different places and say and do just the right thing. But for every other living being on this world, there's a time when our nature is going to serve us well and other times when it's not going to serve us well. When we recognize this quality in others, if we truly understand this point from Bhagavad Gita, that everyone is forced to act according to the qualities they have acquired from the three modes of nature, it becomes very difficult, frustratingly difficult to blame anyone for anything. If you truly think about it, it saps anger. It removes it from our system because we look and we think, you can't, and you know what's usually what that nature is built of? Is our history. In the material world, our nature, we're not speaking about our transcendental, eternal swarupa, that nature. The nature we're speaking about, born of the three modes of nature, that's a product of our past. That's a product of our history. And so every unreasonable thing a person does has a very good reason behind it. Most unreasonable behavior is a reasonable reaction to an unreasonable situation that they have been in. I knew a person who was very stingy with their money. They were just, penny pinchers, and every little thing, it was just a big deal. And, the mind, I became critical, thinking, this is a little over the top. Generosity is a quality of a devotee, and why do you behave, and so on. And then somehow, through other devotees, I heard about this devotee, a devotee I knew next to nothing about, and yet I was quick to judge. And in their past, they had grown up. Their father had died very young. He had to take the responsibility to raise the entire family, to support at a very young age, and gone from earning, a pittance, saving every penny and every dollar, built themselves up to where they led a decent and comfortable life. And thinking back at that history, the fact that this person still counted every penny and still thought 10 times before spending it, it's completely reasonable, right? I mean, I was fortunate not to grow up in a circumstance like that, so I cannot appreciate what this person was going through. And yet, every person has a story behind them. They're a history that is a product that has developed their nature, which now determines their behavior at this point. In fact, if we were able to see people's subtle bodies and what they had been through, I mean, we can look at a person's physical body, yes? And we do, and we judge them for it. We look at them and we assess different things about them, right? This person's probably an athlete. This person doesn't look very athletic at all. We look at their physical features. But according to the scriptures, we've got two sets of bodies, the physical and the subtle. The subtle body being of mind, intellect, and ego, which we carry from our previous life into this life, unlike the physical body. If we could observe that subtle body of persons, what would we see? If we could see our own subtle bodies, what would we see? Frankly, what we would see in every case is someone who's twisted and pained, right? We would see wounds that are still bleeding. We would see that certain parts of their body are larger or smaller or deformed because they have been harmed or hurt or pained or abused or put in anxiety about something in their past over time. And if we could see that subtle body, then we would understand right away. Just like if you say, come here, please, and that person doesn't, they stand up and they kind of slow, come here quickly, and they're just hobbling towards you, then right away you look at their body and you know why they're not reacting to what you asked, right? Because clearly there's some kind of pain in the leg, which is causing them to hobble. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that with people's subtle bodies. Otherwise, it would be very clear why they react in a particular way. Just as we know that our children get angry when they're hungry, or we get angry when we're hungry, because we can see that quality in us. It's a physical quality. And yet the subtle body is just the same way. Certain types of situations will produce a trigger. We will put we will be in a circumstance, we will say something, and they will lash out and insult us. And we're going, what? I just said a sentence. Why did you react in that way? Well, because we just poked an open wound in their subtle body. And of course, that's a reasonable reaction if someone pokes an open wound. This is why, in Nectar of Instruction, it says that we should never judge a devotee based on their physical attributes, isn't it? That it's like bubbles in the Ganga. They sometimes look foamy and looks a little unclean, but we should not judge the Ganga based on those bubbles. In the same way, any bad qualities, any disease or deformity or bad looks in the body of a devotee, we shouldn't judge them. But again, we've got two bodies, the physical and the subtle. So why not apply that same logic to their subtle body? The devotees around us can be great souls. Their hearts and their lives are dedicated to Krishna. And yet, because of some superficial deformity they have on their subtle body, they can be a little too prone to anger, or a little too stingy, or a little too whatever it might be. They're a little harsh, or they're not able to control themselves when they're hungry, or whatever it might be. In the same way, why judge a devotee based on the quality of their subtle body? It's like foam on the Ganges. It doesn't go to their heart. Just as they give up that physical body at death, one day when they go back to Godhead, they're going to give up that subtle body too. And all that will remain is the pure soul. And that's who we will encounter in the spiritual world. So the first step in changing our view of the other is to consider this point, that they are forced to act according to their own nature. And that shifts our perspective. It decenters us, and it centers our focus on them. The second is to consider that perhaps they are under duress. They're under trouble themselves, which is why they're acting in this way to us. And the finest example of this is that of Lakshman and Sita Devi. And I credit this example to Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. He wrote this really nice article in Back to Godhead called Intention in Tension. If you know Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, he's the master of wordplay. He's so good at working the Indian language. His titles are just amazing. Intention in tension. And the point of that is that we should not take too seriously a person's intention when they are in a state of tension, when they are under duress. And the example is that of Lakshman and Sita Devi. When Lord Ramachandra goes off to find the deer in the forest, and then they hear Lakshman and Sita are left behind. He leaves Lakshman to protect Sita Devi, and they hear Lord Ram's voice, which is not actually his voice, it's the voice of Marich. And Sita Devi turns to him and says, Lakshman, you have to go help your brother. And Lakshman says, no, I know him. He's not like this, Same just like Balaram. When Krishna is in the coils of Kaliya, then all the Brajbasis want to run in, yes, to protect Krishna. And Balaram says, no, I know him. He's fine. And Lakshman says the same thing to Mother Sita, but she's desperate. She's in total anxiety because she feels Lord Ram is in danger. And in that moment of tension, she says some horrible things to Lakshman, which she regrets for a long time. She says, I now know your true intentions. All this time you have been waiting to enjoy me. You have been waiting for the day when your brother will be dead so that you can enjoy me on your own. And these words tear apart Lakshman. They pierce his heart. They rend it asunder. Here is a man who has been so chaste and faithful as a servant to Ram and Sita, to his brother and sister-in-law, that when Sita Devi is captured by Ravan, and he's taking her in order to help them find her again, she takes off her jewels, her jewelry, her ankle bells, her bangles, her earrings, and throws them onto the ground as a sign for what direction they're going in. The monkeys and bears find this, including Hanumanji. And Ram and Lakshman eventually find them and ask about their dear wife, or Ram's beloved wife, Sita Devi. And the monkeys say, I think we might have something. We found this bag of jewelry. Maybe you can look at it and tell us. So Ram sends Lakshman. He says, you go inside and you see. And Lakshman, they open it up, and Lakshman looks at all the jewelry. And he says, I can't recognize any of this, except for this one piece. Which ones? The toe ring, right? Or the ankle belt. This is all I can recognize. So chaste he has been, so faithful, that his whole life he has not gazed at Mother Sita except for her lotus feet. And that man is now being questioned, accused that his intention is to enjoy Sita himself, right? It just tears him apart, and he can't stand it. And so he draws the Lakshman Rekha, and off he goes to help Lord Ramachandra. Of course, he finds that it was a demon, and Ram is like, where did you leave Sita? And she's still there in the hermitage. How could you leave her like that? I told you to stay with her. And Lakshman explains. He says, she was accusing me like this. And Lord Ram just dismisses it. He says, you should have ignored that. Why did you leave her? I told you to stay there. Don't take stuff like that seriously. Poor Lakshman. He gets it really bad both ways. And this is why he never comes back as the younger brother ever again after that. As Lord Balaram, as Lord Nityananda, he's older. He figures, I have to be in a position where I can protect the Lord because he doesn't do a great job of protecting me. But the point Lord Ramachandra teaches him at that moment, right, is to say, she was under duress, and you knew that very well. Why did you take her word so seriously? Right? Now, it's a tough lesson, no doubt, and none of us would probably pass in a situation like that. The Lord shows the highest possible standard with his own beloved devotees. But it's a very important lesson, that when someone wrongs us in some way, it's likely because they are suffering even more than we are. The pain that we feel as a result of their misdeed towards us is just a small percentage of the pain they are feeling in their own heart, probably for something completely unrelated to us. That's a guarantee. It's 100%. Because suffering in this world is born only from suffering. It's not born from happiness. When we give out suffering, it cannot be a product of a joyful heart. It cannot. Suffering breeds suffering. Joy brings joy. And so if someone wrongs us, then better we shift the focus from ourselves to them and say, what is it that is giving pain to their heart? They must be suffering so much themselves. And again, this drains away the anger that we might feel in that circumstance. The third and final point to remember in shifting our focus, shifting our perspective about them, is to remember that they too are very dear to Krishna. This is sometimes the most difficult thing to swallow. When someone harms us in some way, insults us or whatever, we want to see them crushed. We look at them and we think this person has no good quality whatsoever. After all, if they could possibly harm a great sage such as myself, how could they have a bad quality? How could they have any good qualities? Right? And yet often we see that same devotee being loved and praised and sometimes even elevated, succeeding in their service. And we think, how is this possible? Right? How could this possibly happen? I thought you would be destroyed by Krishna. I thought there would be a bolt of lightning and you would be finished. And yet you're still on the altar, worshiping Krishna and looking completely blissful. How can this happen? And so it's difficult, but this is a fact, right? We know from that verse yesterday, apichet suduracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak. Even given the fact, let's grant the fact that they have done something bad. Even then, they are dear to Krishna. And if they are dear to Krishna, then why should we despise them? Why or how can we despise them? Because Krishna still loves them. In both the case of Parikshit Maharaj and Durvasa Muni, we find that there was a shift in perspective that took place, where the person who was wronged looked at the other person and recalibrated who they were and how they were behaving. Shamik Rishi was wronged, and how did he when he saw the snake, he recalibrated his perspective. And he said, okay, the king was under duress. Yes? He was pained by hunger and thirst. What man would not behave in irrational ways when they are hungry and they are thirsty? And immediately his anger drained. When Ambarish Maharaj was wronged, the Bhagavatam says the same thing. That Durvasa Muni was really hungry when he got angry. He was hungry, he came there, he saw that he had already eaten, and he pulled out the hair and he created the demon. Now, ideal circumstances, all of this wouldn't happen. Ambarish Maharaj had fasted for a year and still he was able to control his anger. But from his perspective, from Ambarish Maharaj's perspective, he looked at Durvasa Muni and he changed. He changed his perspective. And in this way, he dealt with any type of anger that might emerge. This person is under duress. This is this person's nature to behave in this way. Or, Krishna, this person is very dear to Krishna, and so I cannot get upset. So these are typically the three different ways we see in Bhagavatam that a person who has been wronged deals with their anger and deals with their hurt by decentering themselves and focusing on that person, changing their perspective about that person by either tracing it to that person's nature and their history, or tracing it to the circumstances that put them in that situation of pain, or by recognizing that person's relationship with Krishna. Okay, so that's the first strategy for recalibrating, for getting ourselves to forgive, is to recalibrate our perspective about them. The second strategy, which is equally used in Bhagavatam, a way to get us to forgive, is to recalibrate our perspective of ourselves, our own selves. Why did this happen to me? The first one is something I think you can guess, because we've talked about this yesterday. A devotee thinks, Krishna is relieving me of my pride and drawing me closer to him through this experience. Prabhupada says in the 4th canto, he says, as usual, a devotee in an adverse situation of life accepts such a condition to be the mercy of the Lord. He says, as usual. This is the common behavior of the devotee. As usual, a devotee in an adverse condition of life accepts such a condition to be the mercy of the Lord. The second way we can change our perspective, I won't say too much more because we discussed that yesterday, that first one, of getting to see it as Krishna's mercy. But how is it his mercy? Well, often because Krishna is providing an opportunity for us. So the second way we can change our perspective on the situation for ourselves is to say, embedded somewhere in this pain or insult or whatever it is, Krishna is providing me with a special opportunity that I have to embrace. And this was the glorious response of Maharaj Parikshit. He got the curse, and what did he think? This is an opportunity. I've got 7 days, 7 long days to live. Let me use that to perfect my life. Let's go to the bank of the river and let's hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this way, he benefits himself and he benefits the whole world. One of the most wonderful opportunities that we get from being the object of someone else's pain-giving or attack or target, one of the greatest opportunities we get is that we can use that experience to help others. Once we have been through it ourselves, then we have the ability to turn around and give that help, that support to someone else who needs it. This is why the devotees are so much more merciful than Krishna himself. Because they know, they're right here with us. They've been through it. And they know that despite all of our misdeeds, despite everything that we do wrong, we deserve mercy. We deserve compassion. Because they know what it's like to live life in the material world. This is why when we ask for mercy, we ask from the ground up. We ask from our spiritual master. We ask from our own senior God brothers and God sisters and fellow devotees, and then work our way up. Because the closer they are to us, the more they understand our situation. This is why I so much love that song by Narottam Das Thakur. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Daya Karo More Toma Bina Ke Dayalu Jagat Samsare. He turns to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and he says, please have mercy on me. Other than you, there is no one more merciful in this world. But having said that there's no one more merciful than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the song should end there, no? There's no one more merciful than him, and we have him. And yet he continues. He says, but Mahaprabhu, more merciful than you, or the conduit to get your mercy, is through Lord Nityananda. Ha ha Prabhu Nityananda Premananda Sukhi. And then he descends again. And he says, actually Advaita Acharya, by your mercy, we get the mercy. Tava kripa bale pai Chaitanya Nitai. And then he drops one level again. And he says, ha ha Swarup Sanatana Rupa Raghunath Bhatta Juga Shriji. Oh, 6 Goswamis, who were his immediate spiritual master. And then he drops one level again. And he says, his own senior godbrother, Srinivas Acharya. Daya Karo Shri Acharya, Prabhu Srinivas. They studied under Jiva Goswami together. Right? They were godbrother, but Srinivas was the senior. And then he finally turns to that devotee next to him. Ramachandra Sangamage Narottama Das. He's asking for association of his own peers. That mercy flows down that way because those who are at the bottom of that chain, they can understand our condition very, very well. Better than Krishna himself. And this is why the devotee of the Lord is so much more merciful. So that opportunity, Krishna provides us an opportunity. And if you look at any great person in this world who is truly benefiting the world, in any area, it's because they themselves have been through so much. They have. And so you find the greatest champions against drunk driving, or the greatest people who funding cancer research, or the greatest people doing any kind of humanitarian work are the people who have been affected directly by that circumstance in their own lives. So when we face something in the material world, that's an opportunity for us to grow, but also for us to give, to benefit others. And then the third change in perspective for ourselves is by saying, you know, in this situation, I probably made a mistake too. I had a hand to play. It wasn't just a one-sided deal. If we remember, Jai and Vijay went through that process. In that story, not Jai and Vijay, the 4 Kumaras, they felt wronged. And they were right to feel wronged. They were wronged. But by the end of the story, they came to recognize that, yes, we had a role to play in this too. We too overreacted. We were too quick to respond. In fact, Vallabhacharya, in his commentary on this episode, he says that the reason, you see, there's 7 gates to Vaikuntha, and the first 6, the 4 Kumaras did not even see the gatekeepers, even though there are gatekeepers at each of the 7 gates. They were not stopped. But the 7th gate, they were not able to pass, because they had the qualification for the first 6 gates. And he lists those qualifications. But the 7th gate requires bhakti to pass through, to see the Lord. And they were not envious of the Lord, no doubt, but they were still not devotees. They were Brahmavadis, they were impersonalists. And so they didn't have that bhakti in their heart. So they couldn't enter that gate, and they never did. The Lord came out of the door to see them, and then bid them goodbye right there. So Vallabhacharya, different acharyas have different opinions about who's at fault in that story. And they tussle about this point. And Vallabhacharya is definitely on the side of Jai and Vijay. The fault is with the Kumaras, and he does his level best to defend them. And Sridhar Swami, on the other hand, is more on the side of the Kumaras. He's like, Jay and Vijay's fault is there. And Vishwanath Chakravarti is more on the side of Jay and Vijay rather than the four Kumaras. And Prabhupada, he dances very carefully between all the acharyas. In one purport, he points the finger at Jay and Vijay, when the Bhagavatam itself does. And then, in another purport, he points it at the four Kumaras, when the Bhagavatam itself implies. But he's both. He sees the fault in all different sides. Right? And the four Kumaras come to recognize this, that, yeah, I had a role too to play in this situation. And this is why we too have to suffer some reaction there. Now, there's one caveat I want to make, and this has to do with a question that was asked yesterday. I think it was the last question that someone asked, and I'm pretty sure I misunderstood that question, thinking back at it. The part of the question, it was about self-respect, preserving self-respect. But I think I missed the first part, missed answering the first part of that question, which was, how do you preserve self-respect when someone in a position of power keeps targeting you and saying you're at fault and you're at fault? Do you keep asking for forgiveness and forgiveness and forgiveness? And yes, it's my fault too, it's my fault too, it's my fault too. And there we have to be very careful. We have to be extremely careful, because this harkens back to what I was saying last time with the advice I received from Shachinandan Swami. That we cannot take every criticism seriously, particularly if that criticism is repeated and repeated. And if we go through the process of seeking forgiveness, and then we don't feel any better, but we feel like dirt after that experience, then there's likely something wrong. There's an abuse of power that's happening. And so it is essential to get advice from others around us. Again, those who are our seniors, that we can, those 2 or 3 people in our lives with whom we have guhyam akhyati pritchati, we have the confidential revealing of our mind, to get advice and say, what's happening here? Am I really crazy, or is there something wrong in this situation? So that that situation doesn't get out of hand. It doesn't get too terrible. Because there are terrible people in this world. There's no question about it. The situation we are describing is with reasonable people. People who are genuinely trying to improve themselves. But in a situation like Ravana, for example, right, and Mother Sita, there's no question of her saying, I'm sorry, and it's his whole approach to the situation is one of exploitation. And that's no good, right? The whole logic of forgiveness doesn't work there. Yeah, or in the case of Duryodhana, so many others. So, these 3 ways we change our perspective. Krishna is relieving me of my false pride and drawing me closer to him. Oh, this is also, if you need another example of the Avanti Brahman in 11th canto, also goes through this shift in perspective. He starts off feeling a great sense of resentment. He's a merchant who lost his money. And after he loses his money, he's abandoned by everyone. His community and his society and his family members, and everyone's ready to spit at him. And initially when you hear his song, you can hear the resentment and the frustration that comes from being rejected by the world. So all they really wanted was my money, right? And now no one cares. You can hear it in his voice, the pain. And then there's this shift in tone, in perspective that happens, where he looks at his situation and he says, actually, this is an opportunity. Krishna is drawing me closer to him. He has left me with no one but him to seek shelter to. At last I am free to surrender to him. How wonderful this is. And he becomes joyful. So many examples are there in terms of how this can happen. But all 3 of these steps all require the same thing. They require that humility that we talked about last time. Because they all require, each one of them, changing our perspective of the other and changing our own perspective, requires the same thing: decentering ourselves and centering, focusing on the other person, or focusing on Krishna at the center, but pulling ourselves out from that center. And so humility becomes the fundamental bottom line of it all. I remember a long time ago, I asked His Holiness Radhanath Swami about humility. Again, it was one of these special moments where I had a moment with him, and I thought, I should take advantage of the association of a great soul. Maharaj, please, can you tell me how to maintain and cultivate humility? And Maharaj's answer was beautiful. It was just very simple and very powerful. He said, what I would recommend is every day you find at least one menial service to do, one physical, humble service to do. Because he knew that my service is often speaking and often teaching and often doing this and that. And he said, you find one menial, one basic physical service to do. And just at that moment, the devotee who was standing next to me, his garland broke on its own. It kind of fell apart. And Maharaj quickly caught the garland and took it and tied both, asked him to turn around, tied the garland back on his neck, and started laughing and saying, see, I've done my menial service for the day. And, he got this oceanic smile, and both his shoulders started shaking in the way that, how Radhanath Maharaj laughs. He envelopes the whole room with his laughter. And he says, I've done my menial service for the day. So that, or if you look at someone like Satsarup Maharaj, for example, the way he writes in his own diaries and in his books, it's humility beyond compare, particularly for someone of senior status like himself, making himself so open and so vulnerable in his own writing. And in fact, he writes wonderful things about forgiveness as well. So that's the foundation, right? That's the bottom line there. So how do we forgive? Okay, why do we forgive? Well, it's going to be beneficial to us, beneficial towards others. It gives us great relief. How do we forgive? Well, change our perspective of the other person. It's their nature, it's their history, it's not about us. They're under some duress or some trouble, they're dear to Krishna. Or change our perspective about ourselves. This is an opportunity from Krishna. This is Krishna drawing me closer to me, relieving me of an anartha. I was involved. I made a mistake too in the situation. Now, a couple more things to point out. When the difficulty happens, when we are asked to forgive, a couple more smaller points to remember. Suppose we are in the fortunate situation where someone actually comes and asks us for forgiveness. Then what is our responsibility in that situation? A few things. One is we do not question that person's intention and sincerity in asking forgiveness. Remember when we talked about asking for forgiveness? We said that the most important thing was intention and clarifying that and not having ifs and buts attached to it. When we're on the other end, the opposite, the advice is opposite. It's reverse. We don't worry about intention. We take that person at face value. They are saying sorry, they mean it. That's it. That's going to be the quickest way for relief for both them and for us. It's the quickest way to get that pain to calm down on all sides, is not to question the intention. This is a quality specifically of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that when anyone goes to Mahaprabhu, his great quality is he does not ask, do you really mean it or not? He just assumes that you do. He assumes that you're really chanting because you're calling him. that you're really doing this service for his pleasure and not for our own pride. He just assumes it. I mean, even it's said that Lord Nityananda is so merciful that even if we fall asleep in the temple, he thinks, this person's paying dandavats. Look. No question of intention. What is the idea? Even Lord Vishnu takes that, and we saw this with the case of Ajamil, right? So when the Lord does not question our intention, and we in yesterday's class we saw that again and again, then what right do we have to question intention? To be the lawyer and to say, do you really mean it? And if you did mean it, you ought to do this or do that. And therefore, often we need to be satisfied with even an indirect apology. Remember how yesterday we were saying that the apology has to be specific. What did I do wrong? And why am I sorry in order to be effective? Well, again, the advice is exactly the opposite if we're on the receiving end. If all we get is an indirect apology, let us be satisfied with it. Sometimes there are good reasons why a more direct apology may not be possible. Sometimes a person may be in a senior role. They may be our senior in some ways. And for them to just change their behavior towards us, we understand, okay, they've come to recognize it. They've come to appreciate. Or maybe there's something else preventing them from coming directly and specifying their mistake. But if we receive acknowledgement that yes, they have understood, let us take that as an apology and be satisfied with it. If someone actually comes forward and states with humility and states their feeling of mistake, then our responsibility becomes, let us not try to crush them. Let us not try to humiliate them or to take away whatever little dignity they may have left. It takes a lot to say sorry, particularly to someone's face. And one of the most generous acts of this that we see in Bhagavatam is between Krishna and Indra. When Indra does the most horrible thing possible of trying to kill all the Brijbasis and attack Krishna and hurt Vrindavan, after it's all over and Krishna has lifted the mountain for 7 days, Indra comes for apology. And you know what Krishna does? He finds a secluded, quiet place to meet him. Why? Because Krishna doesn't want to humiliate him. If anyone deserved to make a public apology in the village square, it was Indra. Because he had tried to hurt every single one of the Brijbasis. And if Krishna took him in the middle of the village square and told him there and humiliated him, it would not be enough. And yet Krishna was so generous. He found a secluded place. He sat down quietly under a tree at the foot of Govardhan and took it there. There's one other example I have of this. Ambarish Maharaj. When Durvasa Muni comes and falls flat at his feet, clasps his feet, Bhagavatam says that Ambarish Maharaj is mortified. And he starts praying to the Sudarshan Chakra as quickly as he can, just to relieve Durvasa Muni from any further humiliation. He's a sage, after all. He's the spiritual master of every king and every person on this planet. As a sage, as a sannyasi, as someone who's renounced and so knowledgeable, why humiliate him further? He's been humiliated already. Enough. And he's not at all happy. He's mortified. And he quickly changes, he moves, and he starts praying immediately to Sudarshan Chakra. One more example. Parikshit Maharaj. One might wonder, why is it that Parikshit Maharaj did not go to Shamik Rishi and apologize for what he did. That was, after all, the cause of the curse, right? And yet, he didn't go. Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport. He says that Shamik Rishi, when he saw the snake and his son told him about the curse, right away he sends a letter, a message to the king, telling him about the curse so that the king can prepare. It's the least he could do. But Shamik Rishi is so repentant, so remorseful for what his son has done. He tells his son that you have taken the last righteous king and you have killed him. Why? All because of a little snake on my neck. He was hungry, and that was it. And yet you took it so seriously. He's so remorseful. He writes this deep apology letter to Maharaj Parikshit, expressing his regret, and sends it to him with notice of the curse, that there's nothing that can be done. Please prepare. Prabhupada explains that Parikshit Maharaj did not want to humiliate the sage further by going to ask him an apology. You know what would have happened? He would have gone, and the sage would have fallen at Parikshit Maharaj's feet and said, forget the snake. My son just killed you. I'm so sorry about that. And he would have felt even worse and even more guilty. And he knew that the sage was already tearing himself apart. And so by presenting him in front of the king, it would have made him feel worse. How generous an act, right? That in thinking about the king's, the sage's welfare, because he knew the sage was so apologetic, he helped him save face by not going before him and just quietly departing the kingdom for the river. But frankly, getting a direct acknowledgement of mistake from someone is a rare thing. Most of the time in this world, all we get is something indirect. All we get is something, perhaps we're feeling excluded by someone, and they'll start including us again. We say something to them, I'm feeling a little excluded, or someone else says on our behalf, and they'll pull us in again. And that's an apology. Right? We accept that as, okay, they're making an endeavor to bring us back. They're helping us. So much of what gets us in trouble in relationships is not when we point out someone's fault, it's when we force them to admit it. When you say between a husband and wife, suppose my wife tells me, you really should be taking out the trash. You never do it. And I've asked you many times. What's my immediate reaction? I'm going to deny it. I'm going to say, well, I did. Just last month I took out the trash for you. And anyway, you tend to fill it way too much and it's too heavy. Can you tell me sooner so that it's not so difficult? And I'd want to do it more often if it wouldn't be overflowing and wouldn't be a mess on the floor and I have to pick it up. And anyway, why don't you sort things into recycling and not? And my immediate tendency is to deny, is to push back, yes? Now, if she were to demand me to admit that okay, I've got it all cataloged. I've been keeping this diary. You didn't take out the trash yesterday, or the day before, or the day before that, or the day before that. And from now on, let's keep a diary on the fridge and you mark the number of days you've taken. If she were to go down that route, which thankfully she never does, but if she were to go down that route, it would be the beginnings of a conflict, right? Because when she has pointed out the mistake, I have done the normal thing of not admitting it. But at the same time, even though I did not admit the mistake, I've heard it. It's gone somewhere inside. And 90% of people, if they're reasonable, it registers. When you say something, it registers. They may not admit it, but it has gone inside. And the next time they're in that situation, they'll think twice. It'll occur to them at least. Maybe they'll still make the mistake again, but at least something will work. You might have to say it again, right? But it's when we try to make them admit the flaw. Now you admit that you've made a mistake. That's when we get into trouble. That's what breaks the relationship apart. That's what causes the friction. So, if the mistake has happened, it has been pointed out, there's been some shift in behavior, or we can give them some time to shift that behavior, let us be satisfied with that. No more. No more actual recognition. Because the scenario I described yesterday with the 4 steps, offer your appreciation, then a specific statement of wrongdoing, then apologize, right? Then suggest a method of improvement. Frankly, it's very rare to find someone who does that in this world. Right? It's very rare. If we can be that person, that makes us glorious, but that is not the norm. Apologies can come to us in every odd way. Partial apologies, indirect apologies, half-hearted apologies, insincere apologies, they all show up. And again, it will benefit us if we take them all as 100% complete, perfect apologies. That's in our benefit, and that's in theirs. One last point I want to make is that the real test on both sides of forgiveness and being forgiven, the real test is the normalization of the relationship. We can say so many words, but the most powerful form of begging forgiveness or forgiving is to normalize the relationship. And we see this very well in the case of Durvasa and Ambarish. When Durvasa offends Ambarish and apologizes, at that point, Ambarish Maharaj turns towards Sudarshan Chakra, begs him to cool off, and Sudarshan Chakra cools down, he moves back, and Durvasa Muni is safe. Right away, Ambarish Maharaj says, "Where were we now? Yes, I was going to feed you. Please, have a seat, let me give you my meal, the meal I had prepared. Take prasad." And he feeds him sumptuously, Bhagavatam says, till he's fully satisfied. And then Durvasa Muni stands up and says, "Now you please eat too." Immediately Ambarish Maharaj tries to normalize the situation. This is particularly the responsibility of the person who is being asked to forgive. That's their generosity of heart, is to say, pull them in and say, okay, everything's fine. Let's go back to normal. Another example, in Krishna and Indra's case. When Indra asks for the apology, worships Krishna and everything, then at the end of it, Krishna says, everything is okay, you please go back to the heavenly planets and you rule as normal. He says, as normal, I want you to rule. Let things go back to the way they were. Let's normalize things. I don't want your position. I don't want an ongoing, penance from you. No, just go back and let things be fine again. Same thing he does with Brahma. Right? That's the real test of forgiveness, if we're willing to then normalize at some point. And the beauty of forgiveness, of giving forgiveness, is that we can do it even when it's not asked. This is something really special about being in a role to forgive, is that everything I described, we don't have to wait for the person to ask. We can do it and we can reap the benefits of doing it without anyone else's involvement. It requires no response from the other person. And a wonderful example of this is Lord Ramachandra and Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi, the younger wife of Dhritarashtra, of Dashratha. She's the one who who calls in those boons and sends Ramachandra back to the forest and goes Sita and with Lakshman as well. And the Ramayana explains to us that Lord Ram, when he returned to Ayodhya, he came to Kaikeyi and touched her feet with affection as great as for his own mother, Kaushalya. And the reason, Valmiki Muni tells us, is because Lord Ram had forgiven her even before she asked. At that point, Kaikeyi asks with a greatly remorseful heart, please forgive me for what I have done to you and to Dashrath and to this whole city of Ayodhya. But Lord Ram is ready to forgive because he's already forgiven before he even got to that point. Somewhere in those 14 years, he let it go. He forgave. All of them did. Ram, Lakshman, and Sita. They all forgave before they came back. So that's the beauty of forgiveness. That's the beauty of forgiveness, is that it's a choice. It's a choice. We don't have to wait for anyone. We can do it ourselves. Sometimes it takes time and it takes work, but it's very much worth it. Very much worth it. So I will stop here in terms of our discussion of forgiveness. If there are any questions or comments that anyone would like to make, I'm happy. Yes, Vaisheshika Prabhu.
Prabhu, you mentioned about the way in which someone who takes responsibility becomes implicated, like it or not. And then you also gave an enticing description of walking away from it all. Can you perhaps balance things out everyone here in the Sankirtan movement is taking intense responsibilities on their head with the idea that that's the right thing to do.
Yes.
The other thing is always there. And remind us again what the upside is.
So, yes, thank you. I should clarify that. The implication that we're talking about, that implication, it does not apply when we become implicated in the service of the Lord. Then, as Krishna reminds us, when we implicate ourselves in his service, things definitely can get complicated, no doubt. I mean, if you look at Mother Yashoda's life or Arjuna's life, their lives are intensively complicated. But at that point, then Krishna is walking us through that implication. He's taking responsibility for us through it. And that kind of implication is helping us to advance. It helps us get better. So when Arjuna is there on the battlefield and he's ready to fight, he's implicated in a lot of karma. And yet, when Krishna gets him to change the reason for why he's fighting to, you're fighting for me, not for yourself, then all of a sudden that he's released from that implication. Even though he still has to fight and he still goes through the pain of fighting and it's still complicated, no doubt, right? So in other words, the walking away, I stated it in rather literal terms, but the walking away from that implication is walking into Krishna's service, right? Just like Srila Prabhupada explains that silence means constantly talking about Krishna. Inaction means acting for Krishna. Celibacy means having children for Krishna. So that's the reverse. That's the flip side. That when we engage in Krishna's service, when we take responsibility for Krishna, there is still anxiety, there is still difficulty, there is still so many things are there. But we're doing it to please Krishna. And then Krishna has our back. He's holding us. He's walking us through that process and looking after us. He's guiding us every step of the way. And in that process, we gain and we improve so much ourselves. Okay. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yes, that was a great relief to hear that.
Thank you. Yes, Prabhu.
So Prabhuji, you were talking about thinking that, this is because of past reactions and all that. So I wanted to understand that in terms of the story of Dharma the bull, and he replies saying that I don't know why I don't think anybody is suffering me. I'm only suffering. Some answers he gives. So I want to understand from that perspective.
Yes, actually, that is I'm so happy you brought that up, because that is the finest example of shift of perspective that we see in Bhagavatam. There's actually no better example of forgiveness caused by a shift in perspective. There is a man who is there beating his legs and causing him his pain. And in the moment, as he sees the perpetrator of the crime, Dharma is able to look at the situation and say, it's not him hurting me, right? This is my karma. This is the nature of this age. This is the nature of that person. He shifts the perspective and says, no, it's not him. It's all this other stuff, right? And stops blaming that person and rather blames the nature of this world, blames the nature of that person, blames history, blames the demigods, blames karma, all kinds of things, but not the person who's actually harming him. He is not my enemy. Prahlad Maharaj makes the same point also, and he's a fine example of this. That all throughout his story, he doesn't actually end up blaming anyone for the pain he receives. He says there's no friend or no enemy. But that example of the bull is the finest, because it's so blunt, it's so difficult, because in most situations the perpetrator is gone. We don't see him. But here he's right there. He's doing it to him in real live time, right? And he's still in the moment able to shift his perspective. So that's an amazing example. Thank you.
So this is from Sundaranand Prabhu, and he asked it yesterday and he repeated that question today as well. So thank you for the wonderful class. How do we understand Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's treatment of Chota Haridas?
Yeah. Okay. So Chota Haridas. So the first thing I should mention, for lack of time, I'm sorry, I won't tell the whole story. But if you don't know the story, you can read it in Chaitanya Charitamrita. But the first thing I want to note is that story, according to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, caused plenty of concern and angst, even for Mahaprabhu's own associates at that time. So the fact that we feel concern reading that story, how could the Lord be so harsh to his devotee and so unforgiving, seemingly, is something that is okay. It's okay. Means even back then, all of Mahaprabhu's associates were like, what are you doing, Lord? We understand your actions most of the time, but this time it's really difficult to digest. Having said that, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gives several reasons for the Lord's behavior. Number one, and most importantly actually, he says that the Lord teaches the world by teaching his devotee. And as a result, he often puts his devotees through things that he would never put anyone else through, because he knows that they will trust him through that experience. What the Pandavas went through, Bhishma Dev says, this is uncalled for, right? No one could tolerate something that Mother Queen Kunti went through. Who could live with that? Krishna does this again and again with his devotees, the very best of them. Thankfully not with us, but the finest of his devotees, Krishna will put them through so much to set an example for the world. And in that case particularly, Mahaprabhu was giving this instruction of non-hypocrisy for one who is a renunciate. That if someone is in the renounced order, there is no slack when it comes to malintention in regard to the opposite sex, that taking pleasure in that association. And it had the desired effect. It says that, Krishnadas Kaviraj says that from that point on, no one inappropriately associated with the opposite sex, not even in their dreams. Everyone was so concerned about that, right? So the Lord does that to teach others. But in his relationship with Chota Haridas himself, the Lord was very forgiving and very kind. And when the devotees described Chota Haridas's end, the Lord smiled. And the reason for that was because he would come to the Lord. He had become a Brahmin ghost, and he would come to the Lord in the evenings as he would sit on the shore of the ocean and sing for him. And the Lord would appreciate that and accept his service. And in this way, he was still associating with the Lord. And he had that relationship had been healed. It had been normalized. It's just that it wasn't visible directly to the devotees. They heard about it through Swarup Damodar, and they heard about it through Mahaprabhu and through others. So Krishna, he's always on good terms with his best devotees, but sometimes he puts them through a lot in order to teach the world. There's no doubt. But it says Chota Haridas never stopped loving the Lord. Krishnadas Kaviraj says. Yes, Palimadan Prabhu.
So, there are instances like King Daksha, when he first time, the forgiving was there and both, but the heart was not melted to the point. That's why the second incident happened. And Prabhupada mentions that he again cursed Narad Muni, because the mentality, even though the forgiveness is there externally and we shed tears and all, but as long as the heart is not melted, so it is very difficult, we keep on continuing the same. So in terms, my question is, how do we really, in a reality life, because in devotee relationship, in making many services together, and there are many kind of conflicts can happen, and the things that who is at fault, and that is the debatable things. Okay, you are at fault and I am at fault. Then it goes on lingering around a topic not resolved. So then forgiving doesn't come. So how do you first come to a position to admit that you are at fault? That's the beginning. So can you give some advice on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess in some sense, the basic answer is it takes practice, right? It takes practice. Krishna says in 6th chapter that even difficult things of controlling the mind can be done through repeated practice. That if we do practice again and again, and we try to get it right, and we always don't, but each time we'll get better and better and better. And that practice we combine with prayer. That we pray to Krishna, please show me a way out of this situation. Please show me how to navigate this situation the best possible. Those two things together, repeated practice and prayer, we can get there. The best solution is just to keep at it, is to stay in the association of devotees, where all of these things are pulled out of our hearts and they're gradually cleansed. It's like having a bag of sharp rocks in a bag. If they stay together long enough and you shake them, then they become all smooth over time, right? So Krishna has made this wonderful bag for us of his temples and a devotee association, and we all got sharp spots on us, so it's like this and like that. But Krishna puts us in this association devotees, and then he shakes us, and he helps us he engages us in service together. And as a result of that service, we poke each other, and we say sorry, and then we poke again, and then we don't, and all those things happen. But if we keep at it with sincerity, then ultimately we become smooth. Ultimately, all those sharp edges and those spots, they smooth away, and those anarthas get cleaned out. So the key is ultimately, I mean, we can give it as much thought and analysis as we want, but the foundational point is that we stay in the association of devotees, and through that association, I'll conclude with maybe I've told this story before, but I was with Lokanath Swami once, and I asked him the same question as with Radhika Maharaj and Shachinanda Maharaj. I said, please give me some advice. And his answer again was really wonderful. He said, Radhika, have you ever been to the Kumbh Mela? And I said, no. He said, if you go to the Kumbh Mela, and it comes time to bathe in the Ganga, he said, you don't have to do anything to bathe in the Ganga. The crowd is so intense that the entire crowd will lift you. And even if you don't want to bathe in the Ganga at the right time, or you don't know what the right time is, they will lift you and drop you into the Ganga. You will bathe. He said, in the same way, all we have to do is stay packed up in the association of devotees and serve Krishna in that association. Then we like it or not, we will be purified, we will end up back to Godhead. Right? No question about it. So I know there's more questions. I'm sorry I went on longer than I expected. So my apologies for that. It's 2:15 and there's also a flight to catch soon. So thank you all so much for your attention. I hope just one little message. I hope through this seminar, if nothing else, you have gained something about the practical applicability of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I know tomorrow you have this wonderful, wonderful occasion coming of Bhadra Purnima, where you've distributed, 150 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam or close, and all over the world, so many sets have gone out, and they're all going to be offered and worshipped on tomorrow, Bhadra Purnima. And I hope in all the effort that all of you have put into this Bhadra Purnima under the guidance of Vaisheshika Prabhu, I hope you come to appreciate once again just how valuable is this Srimad Bhagavatam. Everything we have said in this seminar comes from some facet, some aspect of Srimad Bhagavatam. Either its translations or one of the wonderful Bhaktivedanta purports that Srila Prabhupada has given us, every aspect of it. And yet it is so practical and it's so down to earth, and there's so much that we can apply in our everyday lives should we study it carefully. So it really is the most wonderful gift that we can give to ourselves and that we can give to others. And so it's really an honor for me that I'm here just the day before you're going to have this wonderful celebration of Bhadra Purnima. I really, really wish you all the best in it, and I thank you for your service in distributing Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna.
We have in our movement, anyone who's come here, been introduced to the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we have developed a modicum of appreciation for what it is by reading it, by hearing it from others. But the way in which, at least here at ISV, we've developed the most appreciation for the Bhagavatam is by seeing the person Bhagavatam. Bhavadbhida Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Vibho Tirtha Kurvanti Tirtani Swantakste Nagatabrita. When we see that the qualities of the Bhagavatam are 100% manifest within a particular devotee, then we understand its efficacy. So for us, Radhika Raman Prabhu, you coming here and speaking and just associating with the devotees shows that more than anything else to us, the glories of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're so deeply grateful to you for what you're doing all over the world, but even more grateful that you come here annually. So please, let's thank Radhika Raman one more time, so heartily that he'll consider coming back again one more time. Please. And also, if he misses his flight, he probably won't come back. Thank you very much, and we'll be counting the days until the next time when we get up the courage to invite you back again. Thank you. So I think he has a flight to catch, but he'll be on his. Is that true? You're on your way out now?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. Vanchakalpadurubhascha kripasanabheva cha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavi.